start number.
Okay. All right. So, how many of us are on the call tonight? I can't really see how many of us are on this call, Brother John?
Sorry, it says eight participants currently.
Okay. All right. So, we'll take turns so everyone can read just the question and answers. If anyone doesn't wish to participate, that's fine. But if no one has a problem just reading a question, we'll just kind of go around the room, so to speak.
Sister Diane.
Yes, sir.
If you don't mind, for our new members, could you give them a little background on what we should expect from the text Race First? Who wrote it, the importance of it? If this was someone's first time in the meeting, I don't want them to be thrown off.
Okay. So, Race First is an amazing book. It chronicles everything about the UNIA, about the inception of the UNIA, about the amazing things that Garvey tried to bring about. I mean, he was like master motivational speaker, master of selling the Black race to itself, selling the Black race on Africa and the importance of history. And he covered every topic imaginable, religion, economics, race pride. And then it also chronicled all the trials and tribulations, all the forces that were against the UNIA, that were against the various form of publication and things of that nature. Essentially, in this chapter that we're about to look at, it's talking about propaganda. Because one of the things Garvey noticed was how the colonizers or the suppressors of the Black race use propaganda to their benefit. And so Garvey set out to counter that propaganda and put us in a powerful light. But they kind of turned it around because I guess they didn't expect him to master the use of propaganda so well, because they thought they were the only masters of it. But in any event, this particular chapter that we're looking at tonight is going to talk about propaganda and the various forms of propaganda that Garvey used to the UNIA and the Black race's advantage. So hopefully that's a good summary. Of course, it's not the summary of the entire book, but the first chapter kind of gives an overview of everything from the trials and tribulation in the propaganda arena, in every area imaginable, within the various companies that were started by Garvey, and so on and so forth. But tonight we're focusing on propaganda. So,
add a little.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this book, I believe it was published in '76, was the first scholarly publication on the life and works of Marcus Garvey that author was by someone we consider the authorized historian. And this was the first one that began with the presupposition that Mr. Garvey was not a fool or some kind of idiot, and was a charlatan trying to mislead people. The previous books, with the exception maybe of Elton Facts,
Recording in progress.
under the this first book that really gave a thorough understanding of the history was by Dr. Man, I go.
Hold on, I'm sorry.
Awesome. I'm trying to turn off my audio. Turn off my audio. To use two different screens. Okay. 1 second. Leave computer audio. Okay. Awesome. Brother Miriam, I appreciate that. That was excellent addition. Does anyone else? Most people who have had an opportunity to read the book Race First pretty much can't read it without it having some kind of impact, because it is a powerful chronicling of everything, pretty much, from an historical perspective. Does anyone else on the call want to add anything to what Brother Miriam Mar just added? Okay. All right. If not, we can get started. And just for speed, again, make a notation of any questions that we look at. And then at the end of all the questions, we can address those. And if time permits, we can finish up. I think it was chapter 10. We did not quite complete it, if memory serves me correctly. So I'll break the ice and start with the first question. And it says that in regards to propaganda, what did Marcus Garvey said that the UNIA was calling upon the 400 million, I guess that was a number at the time, members of the Black race to do? So I'll just go ahead and read it, Brother John, just to speed us up. So
Okay.
At the end of our last session, all these questions will be given to everyone for review and study. Okay, so Garvey said that the Universal Negro Improvement Association is now calling upon the supposed to be 400 million members of our race to discard the psychology and propaganda of all other people and advance our own. So if you have more to add to this, by all means, just kind of make a note that it's question number 1, and at the end we can go back to elaborating more on the individual questions. So question number 2, someone wants to take that same manner, just kind of read the question and the answer as according to the book, and then go ahead, please.
I can do it. It's Reverly. Race First, everyone.
Thank you.
Question number 2. As far as Garvey was concerned, what was enlisted by the dominant race in the furtherance of propaganda? The answer is Garvey felt that everything, education, religion, history, the news media, was enlisted by the dominant race in the furtherance of propaganda designed to perpetuate its continuance in power.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Reveille. Again, please make a note if you want to expound on this further, and we'll come back to any questions and do our review at the end. Okay, the next person, please.
Yes, I can do it.
Okay.
So the question is, how was UNIA's propaganda disseminated? The UNIA's propaganda was disseminated in a variety of ways. Its artistic productions, religion, its businesses, UNIA printed materials, moving pictures, Garvey's speech, selections rendered by the Black Star Line Band. Garvey's ambassadors were also charged with propaganda functions.
Okay. Thank you, Brother Naiji, for that. Make a note if you want to add more to that, and we'll come back to it. And the next question, please.
What was the most effective propaganda device used by Garvey?
I felt like I wanted to guess it was, I was thinking Negro World.
Yeah, I would think all his newspapers. Yeah.
The whole, yeah, the whole system. I like that.
Yeah, the most effective of Garvey's propaganda devices were his newspapers. Having been trained as a printer and journalist, Garvey was well qualified for his role as a newspaper propagandist.
Thank you for that, Brother Art. Again, make a note, so we'll come back to these and elaborate more. Okay. And we go to, I guess, the question, I guess, was asking, I can go back up and to the question. I think it was asking, number 5, it was asking what were some of the various, I'm not sure why it's not showing that question, but okay. Right. You can read a second time if nobody wants to read.
I can read it.
Okay.
Garvey founded several papers and journals during his life in several different countries. Name some of them. Garvey's Watchman, Jamaica; La Nacion, Port Limon, Costa Rica; La Prensa, Colon, Panama; co-publisher of the Bluefields Messenger. I think that was Nicaragua. But the Weekly Negro World in Harlem, the Daily Negro Times in Harlem. Those years are wrong. The Black Man Magazine, Jamaica; the New Jamaican in Jamaica; the Black Man Magazine. It was in Jamaica and London. The African Times and Orient Review. Wasn't really his paper, but okay. Our Own, the National Club. Garvey helped to start that in Jamaica. And the Jamaican Advocate, which was J. Robert Love's publication. Garvey's Mentor, the Kingston Catholic Opinion, Jamaica.
Okay. Thank you for that, Brother Marimar. What I did was I kind of captured it how the book laid it out. I think some of them were, they didn't have like the exact date. They just kind of gave a date range. So I laid them out accordingly. Of course, when we get to the question and answer session, please feel free to elaborate on these or the dates and things of that nature. You know, if you have more accurate information on those. I just kind of took them from the book the way that they were laid out. Okay, and we're on to question number 6. May we have another reader, please?
I'll read.
Go ahead, please. Thank you so much.
Which was the most important of Garvey's papers and possibly his single greatest propaganda device? The Negro World, Garvey's front page ideological statement, or statements rather, served as a gospel for Black people throughout the world. The reading of Garvey's Negro World message was a standard part of UNIA meetings, wherever the organization existed.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Dr. Kuda. Okay. And question 7 for someone who hasn't read as yet.
I'll read.
Go ahead, please.
Apart from Garvey, the Negro world was helped in its efforts by a succession of some of the finest editors in Afro-America. Name some of them. W.A. Domingo, 1922-1921, Hubert H. Harrison, 1919 through 1923, William H. Ferris, John E. Bruce, Eric D. Walround, Deuce Muhammad, and Hushua G. Mulgo, an Indian who came to Harlem via Trinidad.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Brother Wilson.
Yeah, Hutcheswa Mugdal. He's in the orientation. They speak on some of these brothers: John E. Bruce, Deuce Muhammad Ali, Hutcheswa Mugdal. Yeah.
Okay. And whoever hasn't answered, can take.
Acknowledged as Dean of Afro-American Journalists, edited the paper from 1923 to his death in 1928. He dictated the last Negro World editorials from his sickbed during the last 3 weeks of his life.
Thank you for that, Brother Art. I'm sorry, Brother Emotep. Yes, so that's just a remarkable demonstration of dedication to to be on your deathbed and you're dictating newspaper. To me, that's just amazing dedication. But we can expound on that a little bit more later. And question number 9, I guess I'll take that one. What kind of penetration did the Negro World newspaper have? And the answer is the Negro World penetrated every area where Black folks lived and had regular readers as far away as Australia. So it was cited by colonial powers as a factor in uprisings and unrest in such diverse places as Dahomey, British Honduras, Kenya, Trinidad, and Cuba, to name a few. And we can come back to this as well after we finish all the questions. And please forgive the typos. Someone can take question number 10.
I can go ahead and do it. It says, why did the colonial powers hate the Negro world? The colonial powers had no illusions concerning the appeal of the Negro world's message for racial self-reliance and its anti-colonial tone to oppress Black people. During its entire existence, the paper was engaged in a running battle with the British, French, United States, and other governments, all of which assiduously sought to engineer its demise, or failing that, to restrict or prevent its circulation, especially in Africa, Central America, and the West Indies.
Thank you, Brother Najee. Okay, and someone else can take on the next one.
Okay. How did the UNIA and Garvey fought the suppression of Negro World and other Black papers? The answer. The 1920 Declaration of Rights protested the suppression of Black papers all over the world, while in 1928, Garvey petitioned the League of Nations, specifically protesting the banning of the Negro World in some areas. The imposition of penalties included life imprisonment and even death for possessing it.
Hey, wow,
Mhm.
a newspaper. Okay, and so we can kind of resonate on that. And at the end, we'll just kind of look at each question and add comments, concern, questions about each of them. So if someone wants to take on 11.
Oh, we just did 11.
I'm sorry, 12, please.
I'll take it.
Go ahead, please.
How did the British authorities ward against the paper? They felt the paper was poisonous and mischievous. It was banned in some areas. It was withdrew from distribution under emergency regulations. In other areas, permission was granted to pass permanent legislation against it.
Awesome. Thank you, Brother Orman. I believe that probably was supposed to be withheld.
Where did I, withheld, what did I say, with?
No, I spelled it incorrectly.
Oh,
You said
okay.
it exactly how I spelled it.
Oh, okay. I didn't notice it, so I'm glad
I
you pointed it
apologize
out.
for any of my typos. But yes, so what we're doing, Brother Orman, we're just going through the questions. And then once we get through all of them, we're going to just go back to the top and just expound on any questions that anyone wants to, go into details on. We're just working with speed and trying to get through the rest of the material as quickly as possible. So thank you for that, and thank you for joining us. And someone wants to take on question number 13.
I'll do it.
Okay, thank you so much.
13. How did Garvey and his followers respond to the onslaught against his, I can't see that word, Joe,
Major.
his major propaganda organ? The answer. Garvey replied with a well-organized smuggling network, which at least in the beginning proved very effective in circumventing authorities, though at great cost to the organization.
Mm.
Yes. Thank you for that. And someone else can take on the next question.
Well, I'll take this one.
Okay.
What kind of restrictions did the United States government put on the Negro world? The United States government, although it never actually banned the Negro world, nevertheless, it kept it under close surveillance from the beginning. In addition, Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer in 1919 gave the Negro world pride of place in his Department of Justice report on radicalism and sedition among the Negroes as reflected in their publications. The Negro World was the first of the several Afro-American publications dealt with in the report.
Hmm.
Is this right,
Okay.
Sister Diane? The pride, the Negro World gave the Negro World pride of place in his.
I actually took it from the book
Okay.
as it was outlaid.
Okay.
Question number 14.
I guess he's trying to say first place.
I guess, I mean, it's 1920s, 1919. We spoke different.
Right. On the top of the agenda.
Yeah.
Might have been
It's
prominent.
on page 116. Let's see. Gotta find it. I gotta find it, but I have that. I made a note that it was on one.
No problem, Sister Diane. We'll have to.
Okay.
My apologies.
All right.
For the record, Palmer gave home was firebombed. He credited black radicals or the red, communist folk for doing it. So he was on a serious hunt to shut everything and everybody down. Prompt him to do that crazy, radical all-out war.
It's coming through a little low on my side. Can everyone hear
It's a little
Brother
low.
Mariamar?
Little low,
Okay.
Brother Mariamar.
Yes, but low.
No.
Oh,
Do you mind repeating that, Brother Mariamar? It was a little bit low.
A. Mitchell Palmer was Attorney General. His home was firebombed just around the time of the all the race riots and all this stuff was going on. And he was blaming the red, this was the beginning of the Red Scare, where they thought a communist revolution was going to spring up in America the way the Bolsheviks, took over Russia. So they were scared that the angry anti-war blacks and the communists were going to get together and tear this country apart. So, he was ready to go on all-out war against any propaganda he considered seditious or anything that was promoting, anything but 100% patriotism in America. So, he and some others at that time was blaming the Negro world and others, but primarily Negro world for causing some of the race riots. So it was, a kind of rough time for the paper. They even tried to get some Uncle Toms to get Mr. Garvey to stop writing the articles like he was writing, including Emmett J. Scott. But that's we can talk on that later.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah. You need someone to read 15?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Why were some established black leaders anxious to see the government move against Garvey rather than a move against the newspaper? Answer: many of them were involved in publications of their own and were sensitive to any precedents establishing press censorship. Yeah, that's a tight answer. But it's a lot to that one, though. I had to remember to come back to that one. 15.
Yes, absolutely. And let's look at the next question. I can take that one.
Oh,
Yes. You want to do that, Brother Naji?
sure. Do that. What was the closest rival to the Negro world as the greatest single propaganda device that the UNIA possessed? Garvey himself. Garvey was referred to as an orator of exceptional force, the world's greatest orator. The excellence and power of Garvey's oratory was probably the single most uncontroversial of his attributes.
That is correct. Thank you so much. And someone else wants to do the next question, we can come back to, we're going to come back to all of these to elaborate. And I wanted us to kind of get a little familiar with the format because the next session we're going to be putting a lot more questions together. So anyone wants to do number 17?
I'll do 17. The excellence of Garvey's early training as a printer and journalist was matched by his long and systematic study and practice of elocution. What were some of the things that Garvey did to become a master elocutionist? Young Garvey visited various churches to study and learn from the speaking styles of ministers. He took elocution lessons from his early mentor, Dr. J. Robert Love. By 1910, Garvey was participating in elocution contests in Kingston. During his first London years, 1912 through 1914, he spoke at Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park. Garvey's speeches filled many pages of Negro World and his other papers.
Thank you for that. Brother Ormond. Okay, so I can do a number 18, which says, how did Garvey credited his propaganda and Negro World for improving the tone of Afro-American journalism? The answer is, Garvey said, when I arrived in this country in 1916, I discovered that the Negro press had no constructive policy. The news published were all of the kind that reflect the worst of the race's character in murder, adultery, robbery, etc. Other features played up by the paper was dancing and parlor socials of questionable intent. Okay. And we can look at the next question. If that wasn't the last one. Was that the last one? Oh no, okay. The next one, please, somebody.
I'll take this one sometime. How did the colonial powers set out to counter Garvey's propaganda? They set out to deliberately counter Garvey's messages. In New York in 1923, the British Consul General actively promoted,
I guess.
a pro-British magazine, the British West Indian Review, to, in his own words, quote, offset to some extent the various propaganda being carried on by Garvey and the Universal Negro Improvement Association, end quote.
Thank you for that, Brother John. You see, you don't even need to know how to type to do this class. So if that was the last question, we can like scroll up to question 1 and then just go down the line and see if, anyone wants to expound on the various questions. So question 1 again was talking about what Garvey was all about, He said the Universal Negro Improvement Association is calling on the members of our race to discredit the psychology and propaganda of all other people and advance our own. So he was fighting propaganda with propaganda. And so it became so powerful. I mean, look at all the newspapers. It was so powerful, they didn't know how to handle it. And so you see the madness, you know, where we went from, oh, you can't, we're gonna do all sorts of things to you, to if you try to read a book. And so now we do it so well that now they're banning our papers for race uplift and to fight against injustices and bad labor practices as far as the labor union goes, and all the various things and injustices that were being perpetrated against the race. So you see hypocrisy all over the place when it comes to, for lack of a better word, the powers that be. But that's what I wanted to add to question number one, race first. Anyone else have any question, comments, concern? We can elaborate on that. If not,
While you were reading that, you said members of our race to discredit the psychology and propaganda of other people and advance our own. It's
to discard.
It should have been discard.
That's correct. That is correct.
Which is somewhat different. Even though when you discredit, you also bring out a lot of information on both sides. But if you just don't pay them no mind and focus on what he was talking about, that would solve the problem. Is what he's saying, you know.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I like to add to it too, if I may.
Go ahead, please.
I think what he meant by that, kind of on par with both of you all were saying. I think that Garvey realized that there was no other type of psychology that the African could adopt that would propel the African forward. And so I believe this is why he called upon, you know, the 400 million to abandon any psychology that was not an African psychology in all efforts to, you know, propel the race forward.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you for that, Brother Wilson. Okay, if no one else has anything else to add to that question, we can look at the next question, which was also just kind of talking about how the propaganda gets spread and gets perpetuated. And Garvey's saying that everything, you see the propaganda everywhere, in the education, the brainwash education, in the religion, in the history, how people with no history capture the history of others and claim it as their own. The news media, how they kind of tell you what they want you to believe and kind of try to persuade you one way or the other. They're not reporting the news, they're trying to give you the news as they want you to see it. So all these tools were enlisted by the dominant race. Well, they call themselves the dominant race, but we know better. But all of that was used in the furtherance of propaganda designed to perpetuate its continuance of power. So if anyone wants to add comment to that, the floor is yours. Okay, so if not, we'll look at number 3. And it's talking about how the UNIA's propaganda was disseminated. So if you see the smartness of Garvey, he's countering propaganda with propaganda. But he went even further because he instilled the race pride, and he added some artistic things like the moving pictures, the phonographs, and so we see religion, we see businesses that were named after past heroes, and people who were dominant in advancing the race. The UNIA printed materials, and we looked at some of those earlier. But Garvey's speeches, of course, and I didn't realize that the Black Star Line had a band. So that came from the book also. It says selection rendered by Black Star Line Band. And of course, all the ambassadors that were strategically placed all over the world also was helping and the functions. So if anyone wants to add to that, by all means, go ahead. Okay. If not, we could look at number 4.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just getting back on the phone.
Okay.
I have folks calling me tonight. Concerning number 3 about the different ways of disseminating propaganda, one that I noticed wasn't, it's kind of there, but not directly. It mentions artistic productions, but music was a definite way that Garveyism spread all across the globe. Some of the finest and earliest musical producers, Andy Ross, one of the greatest, Andy Razafkiarko from Madagascar, produced some dynamite songs and jingles and everything else concerning the Black Star Line, the UNIA. He's the one that wrote, "I'm in the mood for love simply because you're near me." And
Moody's mood.
Yeah, Moody's mood. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, right. And then, people like Wilma Houdini, who did the father of Calypso. He did a dynamite song with Garvey. Anyway, I put a link in the group if y'all wanted to hear it. But also, y'all didn't know that the Duke himself, Sir Duke, actually, who's one of his lead singers for a long time, was the Honorable William Levan Sherrill's daughter, Joya Sherrill. And Mr. Sherrill was acting President General when Mr. Garvey was incarcerated. Later succeeded as President General after Harvey and before. Later. She was the one who wrote the song lyrics. If you catch that A train, it's the quickest way to get to Harlem. Can you dig it? Anyway, the A train is one of my favorite old school Duke joints. Anyway, but yeah, Garveyism was all throughout the music. Some Oscar Peterson, all these early folks, Randy Weston, grew up in the Garvey movement. People, some of y'all jazz names you all may or may not know. But also, Duke Ellington mentioned that he's talking about bebop. He was saying that the bop is the Marcus Garvey extension. That's what he calls it. It's that flavor, it's that culture that he tied in of the times and the spirit of the people that gave that bebop that bop. Garveyism flourished in every available form of media that existed back at that time, including the music, which moved the people. And I think it can be used in the music and poetry again today to move the people once again.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for that. Yes, definitely. It doesn't hurt to kind of go and check those out. So if you have a link to a lot of that material, by all means, there might be, some really younger ones on the call that aren't too familiar with them, but that just is just a testament to, like you said, using every form of media that was available at the time. I think there was some talk about a radio station of our own, but that didn't really come to fruition, but you still see the power of the use of what was available and how effective that that was done, how efficiently that was done. So thank you for that, brother Merriam. Okay, so if no one else has anything else to add to number 3, so we were seeing that the newspapers, of course, were the most effective of Garvey's propaganda devices because, of course, he had the background, trained as a printer and journalist. So Garvey was more than qualified for his role as a newspaper propagandist. And, you know, we saw how there was such onslaught against the newspaper. And when you look at all of this, they're acting as if he was talking about overthrowing the government and doing horrible things or anything compared to their atrocities. I mean, it still just boggles my mind that, you know, they want to brainwash people so much and make a people feel that they're less than and suppress, you know, a race throughout the entire world and in the African continent, that they would go through such measures and, you know, and as their unwarranted deportation. But anyway, that's what I have to add to number 4. Of course, anyone else can chime in on that.
Yes, Brother Garvey was a definite danger to them because Black people have been put to sleep, and to awaken a Black man, they realized the consequences of an awakened Black populace in the nation. So by all means necessary, they were going to definitely, and to this present day, even though they have co-opted and have many of us now working for them, they realize that an awakened Black person is still a danger and a threat, so they will do all in their power to stop them. And this was back at a time when we were probably more centralized as far as having families and having building communities and things like that than we are today. We're kind of a little fractured today, but they still consider us a threat.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that, Brother Ormond. Anyone else wants to add to that? If not, we'll look at 5. In case anyone marked that one to come back to. Again, Brother Merriam, you mentioned that some of these dates were off. I kind of took them from the book, how they were presented, kind of in the order they were presented. Some of the order may not be necessarily accurate. Some may have preceded the other. But I think you said the Bluefield Messenger was not actually a Costa Rican paper, or one of them. Anyway, I don't know if Brother Merriam is hearing me. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
I can hear you.
Yeah, Brother Moriam.
Okay. Yeah.
He might have stepped.
So go ahead.
I said he might have stepped away.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. No problem. So yeah, I kind of put these here as how they were presented in the book. But the amazing thing to me is that there were so many newspapers, and not just in this country, but I mean, all over. And kind of everyone is on one accord, spreading, you know, a common message, race uplift and economic emancipation and race pride and unity. And it's like, man, it doesn't get any better than that to me. But that's what I have to add to that.
I would like to add, the message was also spread, which probably wasn't mentioned yet, by the porters who worked on the trains and worked on the boats and traveled to different cities, the ministers who traveled abroad. Some of them carried this information with them as they traveled back at that time. And but the Pullman porters played a very important role also by overhearing a lot that was going on and also carrying information because they weren't really expected to, because they were considered, Europeans were well gotten, didn't figure Black people were capable of carrying much information at that time. So they went almost unnoticed and brought a lot of information to Black people in different places that normally would not have gotten there.
Right. And that's so important because the propaganda was spread that Black people were inferior and all this nonsense. So part of this too, why we caught them by surprise, part of it was the underestimation of our power, how powerful we are when we're on one accord, and back then it seems like more unity exists than today, but we even caught them by surprise. So now they're scrambling, say, oh, no, we can't positively, impact the mind of these people. We got to get rid of some of these publications. We got to ban it. We got to jail them. We got to kill them. Whatever means they got to do to kill them. So anyway, that's
Well, they also know who we are, and
right.
they know that they have a certain time, and their only extension of time is as long as they can keep us asleep, because it's inevitable that we will rise, and they kind of know it. And but once we get to know that, then I think we'll be well on the road.
Absolutely. Yes, sometimes we have to know our power. And we even see today, we see how Blacks were left out of certain things, like how we were left out of reading a book, if you can imagine any such madness, but we all can. So now we're exceeding, we're excelling, we're showing Black excellence in all these papers. Just like today, we were left out of certain things, sports, tennis, gymnastics, what have you. And once we get a chance to get into that field or what have you, we exceed and we go above and beyond, and we demonstrate Black excellence. So
yes,
yeah,
Blackness is excellence.
that's right. Thank you. I like that. Yes. If no one else has anything to add, we can look at the next question, see if anyone wants to elaborate on it.
Are we on 5 or are we going to 5?
We're on 5 now, talking about the various publications and how efficient, how effective they were in getting the message across. I mean, today we have the internet. Now, I don't know if we're as on point as we were back then without the internet. So it's still mind-boggling how we were able to have so many papers in so many countries and doing such a great job that there was an onslaught against these publications. I'm still like mind-boggled how we were able to accomplish such a feat. But yeah, so.
Yeah, a lot of can come out of that one answer. certainly Mr. Garvey was a master propagandist and always had a publication to spread the word. Um, I was looking again at, like, say, the Daily Negro Times. That was only like from August to October of 22 that operated. Didn't last that long, but there was some significant, people like J.A. Rogers and others who wrote for the paper. But yeah, the thing that when I'm looking at these newspapers, it reminds me of is many cite Deuce Muhammad Ali as teaching Mr. Garvey the newspaper business, and which is ridiculous, of course, because Mr. Garvey's been operating newspapers, printing them, as well as publishing them, his own papers, long before Deuce Muhammad Ali ever started a newspaper. So actually, he was the master coming to the student. It wasn't really the other way around. And Mr. Garvey just, he ever since he was young, he was memorizing dictionaries and winning oratory competitions all throughout Jamaica, and traveling. And yet, people like Robert Hill and his Look for Me in a Whirlwind, PBS or Pure BS mockumentary had nerve to say he was trying to imitate some Billy Sunday. He had to come to America and imitate white preachers in order to be effective. He learned from a serious master. His his uncle, which they used to call his godfather, was Alfred Ernest Burroughs, was one of the premier printers in the world, and he told Mr. Garvey to be the best of the best. And so this was like one of the best, arguably master printers and publicists in the world. So yeah, it's no wonder that the effectiveness of his communication caused his paper to get banned all over the world. People were actually literally getting killed for having this paper on them. People were, we know about, Malcolm X father and others who were preaching the word, but there were a lot of people all over the globe who got slaughtered and who were thrown in jail. And in fact, Nnamdi Azikiwe it talks about when he was young and he first read an article about the Negro world in Nigeria that he went to his father about it, and his father told him, "Well, Mr. Garvey is right, but don't get killed, having this paper on you. These people will get you and do some things with you." And Ezekiel is like, "I don't care. I will do whatever it takes to, I pray to the God of Marcus Garvey. I can get over there to America and, join the movement and be, part of him and do whatever I have to do to spread this word, But, he was so moved by the wisdom that we had been denied because of course, white folks weren't going to teach us certain things. They set up whole schools like Howard University, we call Coward University, and other ones like Hampton and other universities deliberately set them up so that they can mislead us and, educate us the way they wanted to educate. And of course, masters never train their pets to bite them. So we weren't going to ever get any true African nationalism like we deserve. They were just going to give us elements of white nationalism, and hopefully we would try to have good pedigree, like Du Bois and all these other so-called colored intellectuals. But anyway, those papers that Mr. Garvey put out there were definitely powerful tools in our uplift, and started us thinking all over the globe in ways you never would never could imagine. So many stories that came out of that in Africa and the Caribbean of people reading one article and just being so inspired, that they joined immediately. But we don't have anything like that. Well, we have some things like that. Even we have some people. Dr. Umar is kind of effective in that way, reaching people on a mass scale like that. But many of us aren't using the same tools and techniques that we can use because we don't have that same stuff that some of our ancestors were made of. But we
Yeah.
slowly getting there.
Yes. Yes. We were given the okie doke with integration, but yes, you were correct. I believe we looked at the beginning of the book where we saw that Garvey had really early introduction. I think he was an apprentice at 14, if I'm remembering correctly.
Correct.
And then talking about setting up Howard to teach us it's like what Bob Marley said. He says brainwash education to make us the fool. You see, so that's basically all we're gonna get when we only get our education from what's being taught in the public schools or even at the mass media that Garvey employed. Mhm. That was mass media without mass media. Anyway, so in question 6, talks about, of course, the Negro world being the most important of Garvey's paper, and possibly his single greatest propaganda device. And you know, we see all the efforts to ban the Negro world, but he was talking about how the reading of Garvey's Negro World Message was a standard part of the UNIA meetings, and that how it was transferred into so many languages. I think at the time, like 20 something different languages on the African continent. So again, I guess just more testament to the power of Garvey as a master propagandist and disseminator of info. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything to that.
Well, since you kind of went there,
Yeah.
speaking of Africa and the different languages, one of the most impressive stories I always thought was Jomo Kenyatta, because he was one of the students, one of the young children, I should say, in Kenya at the time. When the newspapers would come to the town square, someone would translate them and read them out loud, twice, and the children would commit them to memory as much as possible, and then they run off to their respective villages and let everybody know what Mr. Garvey was talking about, etc. And this was one way that people were effectively spreading the words. That's how Jomo later became somewhat radicalized with Garveyism. And I remember an article by George Padmore that read that Marcus Garvey inspired the Mau Mau, of which, Jomo Kenyatta was considered the central figure in that land and freedom army in Kenya. And some even say that the Mau Mau stood for Mzungu Arudi Wengereza Mwa Afrika Apate Uhuru, which means white man return to Europe and Africans get freedom. So it's similar to Africa for the Africans. So in some ways, that propaganda that lasted so long, people Harry Tuku up in Kenya and other giants in South Africa and all throughout the continent, it resonated for many, many years. Even Equatorial Guinea, I was just studying some of the groups that erected a red, black, and green flag and was trying to break off independent townships to defeat colonialism. It was a huge movement, and its impact is still just only beginning to be understood almost 100 years later.
Yes, absolutely. Anyone else has anything else to add to that? So if not, the next one is just looking at some of the editors, some of the really fine, excellent Afro-American editors. It's not an entire exhaustive list, but it just kind of lists some of the key ones. So of course, some of you may have others who are contributors, but the book kind of touch on these individuals and try to capture time frame, but again, it might not be like an exhaustive list or 100% on the time frame. But if anyone wants to add anyone else or anything to that, by all means.
Excuse me, State President. Excuse me, Vice President, Sister Ryan, Lady President. If I could ask a question to Brother Kamau. Brother Kamau, can you repeat what you said in the different languages of what you said was equivalent to Africa for the Africans, those at home with those abroad? Could you repeat what you said for me, please?
Yes. The group, the Land and Freedom Army in Kenya, that was formed in the 50s, was a resistance to European colonialism, British colonialism particularly. They were fighting for independence, and so the name of the group emerged as Mau Mau, and now different people have tried to credit the source of that, where the word came from. Was it the sound of a gun making, shooting Mau Mau? Where did they get the name from? But one historian had said that the name Mau Mau derived from the saying, which is Mzungu, which is a white man, Urudi, which is return, and then Wingereza, which is a U, begins with a U, but it's Europe. So as white man returns to Europe, and then Moi Africa begins with an M. Africa apate, or gets, or becomes free, uhuru. So anyway, the acronym MAU was basically a Swahili interpretation of something that's similar in spirit to Africa for the Africans. So that's one of the reasons. And plus, of course, Jomo Kenyatta was a staunch Garveyite, who was good friends of George Padmore, who wrote the article back in the 50s about Marcus Garvey inspired the Mau Mau. So just showing there the effectiveness of Mr. Garvey lingered in, the struggle for Africa over the years, and it reared itself all over the place because, like I say, the papers were read in different town squares where people had different languages, different tribal languages, as well as, country languages. And so, the sailors were smuggling in sometimes taped to their bodies, bring them to the local village. And, when the people would read them out loud, the children would memorize them and go back to their villages and tell everybody what the newspaper was saying. So a lot of the words spread in the most, incredible ways, to spread the gospel of Garveyism.
Yes.
Thank you. Race first.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Ebony. Sister Ebony. Okay, so yeah, so that kind of also just shows you ignorance, because they thought, we're elaborately using Mau Mau to represent something that's a deep meaning, but they're thinking, because of their ignorance and lack of understanding, that we were depicting the sound of a gun. You know what I'm saying? It's just like how they talk about giving Africa independence, but when you think about it, Africa was independent before they showed up. The independence was there, so they weren't like doing us a favor and giving us independence. They were restoring, and still haven't done it properly because you're still meddling. They were trying to restore what we had before they show up. So it's all about, people just talking about stuff they don't understand and things of that nature. But thank you, Sister Ebony, and thank you, Brother Mary Mar, for elaborating on that. So
in reference to question 7, I wanted to also mention that these may be the editors, but some were contributing editors, of course, like Mrs. Amy J. Garvey. So there was a few interpreters. Figueroa was one. I forgot his M.A. Figueroa was one of the Spanish translators, which was important because many of the philosophy and opinions were derived during the years that he was translating. And so many of Garvey's speeches where the philosophy and opinions came from actually were already translated in the back of the newspaper. So that I know people have talked about doing a Spanish version of philosophy and opinions, but it's already written. We just got to get someone to put it down because most of it has already been translated in the Negro world and, in Spanish and French. So anyway, but that's one thing. But the French translator was Theodora Holly. It was a sister who was a bad translator. Her father was a black nationalist from Washington, D.C., who moved to Haiti and became one of the leading, African nationalists back in the, early 1900s, et cetera. Bishop Theodore Holly. I mean, what was it? Something Theodore Holly. I forgot his first name. But anyway, but there was a lot of good ones. Certainly Hushwar Mutgal. You wouldn't think by that name and him being of Indian descent that he was a serious Garveyite, but that man was a serious Garveyite. One of those dark, Dravidian looking Indians. But some of his he lit fire up under Carter G. Woodson one time. I remember that distinctly. Because Woodson was kind of, as they say in the hood, playing the 50 or trying to burn both ends from the middle. And so people had asked him what he thought about Marcus Garvey in 22. And he told them, I don't know enough about the man. I can't really say much. So then they asked him 10 years later, and they pointed out this man has a story about Shaka Zulu, Nat Turner, people he couldn't have possibly met. He knows about everybody in the world in his Journal of Negro History. He talks about everybody in the world with all kinds of opinion and personality. When they asked him about the guy whose articles he published in his newspaper, he don't know nothing about Marcus Garvey because he don't want to upset some of his other intellectual friends. So Hushwa Mughal laid him out, and he was debating everybody and anybody on any front when it came to Garveyism as being the best solution to the problems affecting our race, and he won every debate all over the place. They were publishing his victories everywhere, and yeah. But anyway, I got I mentioned somebody earlier. I have a copy of one of his debates with Albert Weisbord, but he was a bad man. So unfortunately, he was at the tail end of the UNI, the Negro World publication when Mr. Garvey began to disassociate with the leadership of the UNIA Incorporated at that time, and so he didn't. From 31 to 33, he didn't affiliate with the paper. He was busy pushing in the Black Man magazine. So, but they were still publishing Negro World, articles. They still was trying to keep it Garveyite. But anyway, but yeah, it was a lot of information in there. And you'll notice like Eric Walren and who was that? Kushwar and some others who were Trinidadian born. In many of Dr. Tony Martin books, he's kind of heavily leaning toward the Trinidadian giants because that was his special interest when he first started studying the Garvey movement. So being from Trinidad himself, so you notice his studies are often saturated with those personalities. But yeah, he did a good job in pointing out Fortune as the dean. But Bruce was kind of neck and neck with Fortune, in my opinion. So I don't know if I put him on the blast like that. Fortune was the best. I mean, he founded the New York Amsterdam News and a whole bunch of other stuff. But Bruce founded quite a few newspapers as well and been publishing just as long.
Mm-hmm.
And Ferris was no joke either. I swear, he's probably the baddest.
Wow. Some real amazing scholars.
Matter of fact, let me ask a question I've been wanting to ask. And I'm just curious. Does everyone know that the Negro World newspaper from 1918 to 33, well, I think it actually cuts off 32, but the Negro World newspaper is available for free online for you to read? Does everyone know or do I need to put that link to the
Yeah, put that up. From what year to what year?
Yeah, it starts in 21. I mean, the actual paper was from 1918 to 33, but the one that's available online, they don't have issues to go back that far, even though there are some libraries that have, some from 1918 and 20, etc. But the online one at the Black New Yorkers page, there's a couple different pages that has the online version. You can go to all the issues, pretty much every one. They skip every so often. But from 1921, I think, to 32 or 33. I think they actually have up to 33. Yeah. They're available online. So I'm going to just put the link in the chat. So if anybody wanted to take that out, as well, man, I read that every day. And the more you read, the more powerful you feel. In fact, I want to send you all this piece. I was reading it earlier from Amy Jakes. She was firing people up about discipleship and Garveyism. And she pulled no punches. She was calling it out. So, yeah, but anyway, I'll put the link in the.
Definitely, that would be great. Thank you for that. My goodness. It certainly helps with an appreciation when you can actually go read the publication yourself, and kind of get into the mood of the time. Definitely. So thank you for sharing that. I was not even aware of that.
Yes, good information.
Yes. Thank you. Okay. So we can scroll to the next question, see if anyone wants to add anything about T. Thomas Fortune. Brother Miriam kind of touched on that, but He was the most illustrious of the Negro World editors. And again, we see the amazing dedication of this man, you know, just dictating the editorial from his sickbed the last 3 weeks of his life. I mean, that is massive, massive dedication as far as I'm concerned. So if no one else wants to add anything about Thomas Fortune, we can look at 9, see if anyone wanted to elaborate on that. And talking about the Negro world penetration, I mean, again, you know, we're talking about mass media at its finest without all the technology that we have today. You know, to me, this, I know this probably is not the greatest example, but to me, it's like we talk about forgot where they're from, but it's the group of people in Africa that had an elaborate map of the star systems.
Doggone.
Like they were, sorry, the Dogons.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they had an elaborate map of the star systems, yet no telescope existed. So to me, this is just, I mean, you know, how do you get such penetration when, you know, we had to use the horse and buggy, so to speak. So that's, to me, is just amazing penetration.
Hey, I got a question about the answer to number 9. Brother Mama, I heard you say earlier you were speaking to the music. Did Garvey's influence, was his influence prevalent in Madagascar? I heard you say something about it was a Madagascar artist that contributed musically, and I wanted some clarification on that from my own understanding.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, no, that's a good question. No, the person I was talking about in particular was, a musician, who arguably was a cousin of Fats Waller. You know, people say, some say he did, some say he wasn't, but he was of the royal family from Madagascar. But he moved to the U.S. Family was being overthrown the kingdom. So anyway, he at a young age he moved to Washington D.C. and started writing poems and songs, and eventually became a prominent figure in Harlem Renaissance. So he had a connection to Madagascar, but as far as the actual movement in Madagascar, I'm not that familiar with movement. But stronger in Nigeria and Sierra Leone and East, Africa, South Africa, but certain other countries, there was some correspondence with certain leading personalities, but I'm not sure at all if Madagascar was one of those countries that had. I believe I remember seeing something related to it, but I'm not 100% on that one. But yeah, check out well, how you spell that? Razafkierko is his full name, Razaf Kierko, but most people just call him Andy Raz. I forgot how you spell his first name. It's not Andy, but Andy Raz is interesting personality. But he was Stone Cold Garvey, along with a lot of other musical giants back then. In fact, I can point out certain leaders in the UNIA whose children and grandchildren, I should say, became prominent in the hip hop community. Like Foxy Brown's grandfather was a vicious musician, and and his father was the head of the New York local back in 26 when they had 40,000 members. While Mr. Garvey was incarcerated, Milton Kelly. But then also, like Fab Five Freddy in the hip hop game. His grandfather used to head the Brooklyn division, and his grandfather's brother was stenographer for the 1920 convention. So you got people all over the place. Definitely hip hop artists. I was going to mention that earlier when Madam President Marshall had mentioned that you know, that some of the young people may not know some of the songs I was referring to, but they know Kendrick Lamar when he said Marcus Garvey got all the answers, and they know you know, Jay-Z when he say now they compare me to the Marleys and the Marcuses. Garvey, you know, when you got
Okay.
these other, you know, hip hop artists, even, you know, the Black Star Line, everybody come aboard and free your mind, Brand Nubian, you know, but other, you know, over the years, folks have represented the red, black, and green and Garveyism. Even what's his name? The godfather of hip hop. What's his name? King King Herc. He was even at the what was that award? The Rock and Roll Music Award. He received the award and he saluted Marcus Garvey. He wished Marcus Garvey was there. So anyway, the music, you know, Max Roach and all these kinds of folks, you know, they you know were staunch Garveyites. That's, you know, Max Roach did Garvey's Ghost with Abby Lincoln back in the, I want to say, the 50s. But then like 12 years later, that's when Burning Spear came up with Garvey's Ghost as an album. You know, so in reggae, hip hop, you know, the jazz, poetry, everything, Garveyism is like flourishing through the music. There's almost no generation you can go to where you can't point out a few of the leading personalities some way talking about Marcus Garvey. So one of the longest and strongest lasting figures in the music and in the culture. So you know, Garveyism lives.
Yep.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. If no one else has anything to add to 9, we can look at 10 and see if anyone wants to comment on that one. As to why the colonial powers hated the Negro world. Yeah, they wanted to keep the race in suppression. Brother John, you can scroll to 10. So they want to keep, you know, the world suppressed to me. But you know, awaken the minds of the Negro, and that's what was a threat. That's what they wanted to stop. But it was the British had the horriblest attacks because, you know, they had the most colonies, so I guess they felt they had the most at stake. But it was, you know, basically the powers, the biggest powers. Garvey had to take that on, and you know, again, that's another amazing feat that that we did so much, even though in the end they kind of, you know, thwarted a lot of stuff that could have gone on to create more results, better results, if it stayed on the same trajectory. But yeah, that's a lot to take on. UNIA, you know, paid its dues. So I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything else to 10 about the colonial powers.
I think just real quick, I think that the Negro world really revealed the true inferiority of the European in all aspects of life, um, culturally, spiritually, biologically. I think the Negro world did that, and you know, it really indicated a true threat to the white superiority that was being imposed upon the world, especially during that time. So, I mean, you know, I think that was a valid reason for them to hate it. It signaled their, like you said, that it signaled their demise.
And yeah, and to me, like I'm probably looking at a different time historically, but why wasn't groups that were burning people's house and lynching people, why weren't those people attacked? You know, the way that and the government step in and try to keep that from happening, the way they're attacking newspapers. I mean, it's just so upside down and don't make any sense when you really put deep thoughts into it.
They were all on the same team. That's what the problem was.
Yes. Yes.
And still on the
Wow.
same team with a little help from us too.
Yes. Yes, that was well said. That's exactly right. Huh. Marcus Garvey alluded to in this chapter, he alluded to the 30 pieces of silver.
Yeah.
Concept. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So, and again, we saw some efforts in chapter 11. I mean, question 11, we saw some efforts in the laws to stop the suppression of the black media at the time, calling us communist and whatever they could put to make it seem like it was such a horrible thing. But basically they wanted to keep the black minds brainwashed. And I mean, life imprisonment and death for publishing a newspaper.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? To me, unless the paper said, let's go strap on our guns and kill so and so, there's like no reason for that. So, yeah, you know what I'm saying? That's just craziness. But anyway, no one has anything else to add to 11. But this massive suppression. We can take a look at 12 with the British authorities and their dirty deeds. You can look at question 12, Brother John, in case anyone wants to add anything to that one. About the paper being poisonous and mischievous. They even come up with emergency regulations. They made up regulations on the fly, basically, and got permission to pass legislation against it. So we see throughout history with Black people suppression, how the government turns a blind eye, and how the government try to facilitate the suppression of a race. You know, just like they didn't do anything significant when the Black Wall Streets were being destroyed, you know. But anyway, I don't want to digress too much. So if no one wants to add anything to number 12, we can look at
I'll just say something quickly about that. I think Brother Wilson was making a good point earlier. What the Negro World newspaper was doing in many ways, and amongst other things, was demonstrating the power of our numbers to African people around the world who may not have understood our, collective strength, and also showed us having different skill sets in industry and things that we were able to do in different parts of the world, so that we were, lacking in this department, we were strong in that department, different places, and we were understanding, that we didn't have to depend on white folks or others outside of our race to do things for us, because we had those within the race who was capable of doing anything we needed. And, when you're trying to control and divide a people so that you can, manipulate them where they outnumber you in Africa, boy, they must have been terrified that these white, black African men and women are going to wake up and realize what's going on and how badly we've underdeveloped their country. And they would want to, throw us out. And, so they were petrified at the idea of this man telling that much truth that widely. And they even had one incident that Professor Kelly Miller had mentioned in an Afro-American newspaper, that there was a guy in Africa who it was an elder that had a stick when he or somebody he knew went to visit. And the guy was saying every time a white man does some atrocity against him, he makes a mark on his stick and say, you wait till Marcus Garvey get here. I'm gonna let him know everything he did. And they were waiting for they used to light bonfires on the shores, waiting for ships of the Black Star Line to come with some soldiers and some ammunition and weapons ready to liberate Africa. But this was the kind of boldness that was being generated. And I'll tell you, it was an exciting time. I wish I could just capture and be there in the middle of it. But yeah, it was a hard time, but it was a time filled with hope and promise, and us coming to realize that we weren't as inferior as they claimed we were. Because again, if we were so inferior, they wouldn't have to undermine us in order to stop us. We'd fail on our own, but since they were doing so much to stop us, we realized what the fear was, so yeah, the paper was powerful.
Wow. Boldness and influence. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that, Brother Mariama. So true. So let's see how number 13. So we see that a whole organized smuggling had to come about. I mean, we're not talking about drugs and crazy stuff. We're talking about newspaper, a whole line of, it's like Underground Railroad all over again. Smuggling network to circumvent authorities and to circumvent being locked up, kicked, beaten, punched, whatever, just because you were seen with a newspaper. So it just shows the lack of evolution of people, because, there was a point in time where you'd get killed if you had the wrong Bible, or, the Inquisition and all that crazy stuff that that mankind had to go through. So we just see that there was just like nothing called evolution, and people just stay backwards even though time progresses, because we see some backward things happening today. Like if we look at the Middle East and what's going on over there, you figure like at this day and age, with everybody, like the big powers having, things that makes the Hiroshima and Nagasaki stuff, look like child's play. You think people would evolve to want peace, but I guess that would be a perfect world. So it just seems like it was just like going back to being caught with a book and being caught with a Bible and all of that stuff all over again. So that's kind of what I got from it. Just the absurdity of having to develop a smuggling ring just to read a darn newspaper that was just about race uplift and, avoiding being, unfair labor practices and all that. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, it was just crazy, but anyway.
Yes, they realized how powerful propaganda is and can be used, especially the truth. And they did not want Black people to hear it because, as you said earlier, it would awaken them and that would create a problem for them. So they did what they considered necessary, even though it created more problems for themselves, but so be it.
And one of the craziness I picked up too while I was going through the chapter, they were talking about how good Garvey had to be, how good he had to be to convince the Negroes that going to Africa would have been better than staying in this country. So I thought that was interesting when they pointed that out, that this man's got to be it was an arm of the government. I forgot the name of the fellow, but he was talking about how good Garvey had to be to convince. But that's easy for them to say because they didn't have to live under suppression because they were doing the suppressing, you know? But I thought that was interesting. Smuggling network, underground network for the newspaper. Interesting. So here we see that the government wasn't like banning the paper in the US as much as some other places that they triggered to ban the paper, you know, their colonies or what have you. But we saw that again, we had a spy network on a newspaper. We had a spy network looking at the Negro world, and you know, and we're talking about, you know, radicalism and sedition and all of this stuff that didn't apply to a newspaper to me, but interesting. Yeah. So we can look at the next question. If no one else has anything to add as we come close to wrapping up. So we saw that a lot of the Black organizations, they weren't so much trying to knock down the paper because they had publications of their own, and you know, they didn't want precedents establishing any kind of censorship. But what they really wanted was to get rid of Garvey, because we saw in the chapter about USA versus UNIA, how some of these other groups, when Garvey was locked up, they would get the mailing list and send out their own papers, and just part of the problem, you know, not part of the solution. So, but I'm like kind of going all over the place. But in any case, yeah, we see the government was moving against Garvey rather than the paper. Is what the Black leaders wanted to see. But of course, they were out to get Garvey from the get-go because the paper was just one avenue. Because they didn't want anybody waking up the mass, as we looked at earlier.
Let me say something to that too. It's important, I guess, to understand, and I may not articulate it fully enough, you know, for it to be thoroughly understood. But during 1917 was a turbulent time for the United States, for blacks in the United States. And it was a turbulent time, you know, not only because of the East St. Louis riots, and there were hundreds of lynchings going on every year, but that was also the year that some black soldiers had got lynched in their uniforms in Texas, you know, because they were responding to a mob of white folks who was, you know, doing some dirty things and trying to attack them. So they returned fire and they got punished, for like they did. But this was a time a lot of stuff was going on. There was a strong anti-war sentiment amongst blacks, and even some blacks who had just started participating in the war and who had gotten injured and came back and wondering what the heck they were fighting for, because the soldiers who they captured in Germany, German soldiers came back and got treated better than they did. And so they were wondering, I'm fighting for democracy for white folks over there in France, and I'm not enjoying it here. So there was a lot of unrest that was starting to mount. And so what the U.S. government and through their spy network, military intelligence at that time, this is even before the BI or the Bureau of Investigation, they had a network that was headed by a guy named Major Joel Spingarn, who doubled as chair of the NAACP board. Now, Major Spingarn, who was heading the NAACP at the time, he was trying to get Du Bois, his buddy, a captaincy in the military intelligence. And so what they decided to do in order to get to turn the tide against black people at that time by going through the colored newspapers. They called all the black colored newspaper people, Chicago Defender, the Afro, everybody, all the black newspapers throughout the country, Tuskegee, everywhere, not Tuskegee, Tulsa, Oklahoma, etc. All of them came to Washington, or vast majority of them came to Washington. And while at this colored editors conference, they fed them caviar, wine, gave them Negro steaks, everything, probably some watermelon, anything they could possibly put, and made them right at ease. And they said, what we need y'all to do, since a lot of blacks are turning against the government at this time, we need some unity. We're trying to fight a common enemy in Europe that doesn't like you all anymore than they like us. So let's, tell the black folks that, that we're their friends and that, they should be more patriotic during this time and help, participate and volunteer for the war. All these black folks, they didn't, they had the government, begging them to do this stuff. They didn't ask for any kind of concessions whatsoever. They were just so happy to, get a little bit of money, a commission for allowing their newspapers. Literally, this is what they said: their newspapers will be used as a tool of espionage against black folks, and they all signed up for it. A hook, line, and sinker. This is many members of the Sigma Pi Phi at that time, also Boule, were part of this group. Moten was part of this group from Tuskegee Institute. Emmett J. Scott and Du Bois helped arrange this whole thing. Because Emmett J. Scott, who was the registrar at Howard, was also working in the War Department as an assistant, to the head of the War Department, or the Secretary of War. So anyway, they called this big meeting in D.C., and the way they celebrated the conclusion of this, Du Bois, on the first anniversary of the East St. Louis riot in 1918, decided to publish a newspaper article called "Closed Ranks." And in this newspaper, he told us all the atrocities we had suffered over the last year, to forget our grievances against America. Let us close ranks with our white brothers and go to war and protect democracy, and all this kind of high sounding crap. And boy, when he did that one, just so he can get that captaincy in the military intelligence, and the department he was in was Negro Subversion Division. So his job was literally to make sure black folks don't rise up. This is, everybody's good friend, Du Bois, double conscious, double agent, half-ass, half-caste, coon that he was. But he was all the time sabotaging black folks, him and his Spingarn buddy. We were all the time smiling in your face, talking about he's your friend. And he was setting us up literally to use the Crisis Magazine and all these other papers to spy and to, run a counter espionage against black folks. And this is all thoroughly documented. So, and then on the same time he was doing that, July 1918, Mr. Garvey decided he was going to celebrate the anniversary of the East St. Louis riot by forming the UNIA and incorporating it on July 2nd, 1918. So you see how one man handled our problems and how the other one, pacifists, act as if, not an activist, but act as if. WE of confusion, Du Bois handled it by selling his race right up the creek. And these folks, man, the dirty stuff that they did. Now, Hubert Harrison came out against Du Bois when he found out what was going on and wrote this article you all got to read called The Descent of Du Bois. Woo, he lit him up on that one. Something awful. In fact, he got his captaincy taken from him because of that article. So, he got, because he no longer could hide under that cloak anymore because everybody knew what he did and how, why he put that stupid article out there. But anyway, this was the beginning of a lot of hatred, against Mr. Garvey, who wasn't selling this, bleaching cream and all this other crap in his paper like they were, who wasn't going to turn against his race, but who was teaching his race and educating them about these clowns and how they don't mean us any good. So he was becoming a serious threat to them and their livelihood, newspapers, as well as their propaganda machine, and busted their whole pink tea party up, he used to call it. Whole brown bag that he was busted. So anyway, this was a serious war that was going on, propaganda war, during that time period. So anyway, it's something definitely worthy of study. In fact, I might put another link in that.
Yes, absolutely.
About, the Color Editors Conference and Du Bois's treachery.
Absolutely, and yeah, and one of the things that kind of opened up my eyes, when we were doing the chapter on nationhood, and then the beginning, Garvey was a direct quote where he says that when we see a black man in uniform being hanged, then we'd think twice about nationhood. And then I'm thinking, you mean somebody actually go and fight for this country, risk their lives, and he comes back to America, and the only way we can reward him is with a hanging? So that was like, my God, that was just like a crazy eye opener. And then even when you talk about Tuskegee, and then you reflected on the Tuskegee experiment, how we can be so trusting today to allow ourselves to be injected with all kind of stuff. I don't know. I don't get it, but anyway, I don't want to digress into something else, but yeah. Crazy stuff. But anyway, where are we? So yes, so we're on 16, and so now we start focusing on Garvey as an amazing propaganda source. Not only what he was able to do as the author and editor and founder of all these myriads of publication, with the help of some other great men, of course, but Garvey himself, exceptional force, greatest orator. So it's like, when you reflect on all of this, you're like, man, how could this guy just play so many roles, and such a great leader to have a following that helps to be on the same page, be on point, practice Black excellence, and just make it a reality. So it's just, that's what resonated with me.
Well, I like to add to that.
Yes, go ahead.
Now, well, I remember the mockumentary, Look for Me in the Whirlwind. They interviewed one of Mr. Garvey's followers, and he had told us that Mr. Garvey once told him that the pen is mightier than the sword, but the tongue is mightier than both of them put together. And Mr. Garvey's oratory was powerful. I remember one of the editors of the Garvey's Voice from back in the 50s, one of my mentors in the UNIA used to always tell me about, speaking is more important sometimes than even writing. Writing lasts longer, but speaking is communicate more effectively. And he would give me the example of, he told me to write down these words: I did not steal that money. And then he said, okay, now let me show you how you can get different things out of it if you read it. Because all you can get out of it is a denial of theft. But if I say I didn't steal that money, then you can say, hold up, then you must know who did. You said you didn't, that kind of way. Or I can say, no, I didn't steal that money. Then I can say, oh, you thought you were entitled to the money? What are you saying? I say, I didn't steal that money. And that's so you can put so much emphasis in speaking, but you can't convey that easily in writing, so the ability to talk, boy, black men get into more trouble just saying a few things than writing whole books. But yeah, sometimes we need to develop that elocution, and that was definitely the only thing that could compete with the Negro world is his speaking. I mean, he actually spoke to a group of 1,000 people one time. By the time he finished talking, 800 of them left the room behind him to join the UNIA.
Wow.
So anyway,
My goodness. Wow. And we saw also the importance of elocution even in the philosophies and opinion. Garvey dedicated an entire chapter to that. But I like that the pen is more mightier than a sword, but the tongue is great mightier than both of them put together. Wow. That's a powerful statement there. I like that. If no one else has anything to add, I think we're coming close to the hour. We can just knock out the rest of these. So again, we saw how the training in journalism and elocution, and we saw that a star wasn't born overnight. He put in his dues, and early education, a lot of great mentors gave us what we had in Garvey. And so it speaks a lot to bring in, we have a lot of diamonds among us, and it speaks a lot how we can bring the diamonds, especially in our children while they're young. We can bring some diamonds out that, and we don't know how far what we do, will take them. Like when Garvey was 14 or 12 or whatever, I'm sure his parents had no clue that he was going to be where he was going to be able to do all the stuff that he did. So it just speaks to the fact that we have to, like yesterday, we were talking about the book on Garveyism, so we exposed the children to who this hero was, and we don't know how, we have no idea how their lives will be impacted just from the exposure to the information. So it speaks to how we can't ignore the youths. We have to do our part. And sometimes they won't drink the water when you lead them to it, but we don't know where certain things could happen. Like I was, not to digress, but I was listening to a little bit about the story of Simone Biles, that somehow they visited the school and she was just a very active kid tumbling around, and they liked her tumbling and admit her into gymnastics. And I mean, the most decorated woman in gymnastics, and she's making moves and doing things that has never been done in that arena, in that space. So we can only introduce the kids to things, and we don't know where that introduction and mentoring and all that stuff will take them. So that's kind of what resonated with me when I was looking at this chapter about Garvey's early education and exposure. If anyone else wants to add anything to that. If not, let's see 18, see if this is about Garvey's crediting his propaganda to the improvement of journalism, adding to the improvement of journalism because the papers were depicting Black people in a negative image. And it's like today, I mean, things have changed a bit, but it was worse before. Like a few years back, it was just all the stuff in the media and the news was portraying Black people in a negative image. So at the end of the day, we have to tell our own narrative. So, Brother John, you can scroll down a little bit. We wrap this up. Anyway, anyhow, so yeah, so that's yeah, we're like right up on 10. So, Brother John, can you scroll up a little bit just to wrap up these last two questions, just to see if anyone wanted to add anything about improving our improving how we were portrayed in the media, so to speak, at least the media at the time. If no one else wants to add anything to that, I guess we could look at the last question, which was about how they were countering Garvey's propaganda, because again, the power of what they were experiencing was putting fears, like how they have fears now because some of the African countries are rising up to to counter their thievery and oppression and terrorism on the African continent. But anyway, that's all I have. Race first. I don't know if anyone wants to kind of wrap up with any final thoughts, comments. The floor is yours, and if not, I'll ask Brother Mariamar to close the meeting with something special.
No, I don't have much. Thank you. Great job again, Sister Diane. I was a little tied up the past hour. I've been trying to follow the presidential discussion. Great job.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for your participation. And always it's a pleasure to have everyone on the call, to have everyone's participation. And if no one else has anything to add, Brother Mariamar, I know you can pull something out of the hat that's short and sweet.
Yeah, I just say the chaplain's prayer. It was written mostly by John Edward Bruce, one of the editors that we mentioned earlier. So, without further ado, you can rise, put your hand on your heart, or stand, or depending on what you're wearing. Actually, sometimes if you got red, black, and green on, you just put your hand on your heart. Not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, saith the Lord of hosts. God of the right, our battles fight, be with us as of yore. Break down the barriers of might, we reverently implore. Stand with us in our struggles for the triumph of the right, and spread confusion ever o'er the advocates of might. And let them know that righteousness is mightier than sin, that might is only selfishness and ought not win. Endow us, Lord, with faith and grace and courage to endure the wrongs we suffer here apace, and bless us evermore. One God.
God.
One God.
One aim.
One aim.
Aim.
One destiny.
One destiny.
One destiny.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.